Welcome to People and Profit, the business show with its own strong and unique brand. Coming up, top Trumps in India, how the US president's name is helping to sell luxury apartments for millions of euros. Brand management, we hear how perceptions of the Trump businesses have changed since he was elected to the White House. And the French government wants more control over foreign takeovers. But is it really a move towards greater protectionism? First up, the Trump name has been big news in India in the past week. The focus has been on the president's son, Donald Jr., who's in the country to promote a number of property developments that bear his family's name. He's rejected accusations that the business has been profiting from his father's election. India is one of the Trump company's most lucrative markets, with the most real estate licenses of any country outside the United States. Questions have been raised about this blending of policy and business, as our correspondent Sreya Banerjee now reports.
150 kilometers from Mumbai lies the town of Pune. It's a technology hub, with skyscrapers dotting the city's skyline. These are the Trump Towers, the first buildings in India to use the Trump name, and they happen to be the tallest in the city. There are 46 luxury apartments spread over 23 floors, and each apartment costs a whopping 2 million euros.
Each apartment is about 6,094 square feet. We've got 5 bedrooms, living room, a separate dining area, as well as a separate deck area.
Those who own property here include India's rich and famous, among them businessmen and Bollywood stars. They're attracted not just by the swanky apartments, but also by the Trump name that they associate with affluence. Sagar Chordia is the first real estate developer to have signed a partnership to license the Trump name in India. It's a recipe for success.
Trump brand has really helped us. We got 20% more appreciation than neighboring buildings. After he became president, we got more visibility. But anyway, we sold the 80% of the project was already sold before he became president.
Chordia isn't allowed to use President Trump's images anymore for advertising purposes. He says he now deals exclusively with Donald Trump Jr., the president's eldest son. But fears of conflict of interest have crept in. Experts worry that Trump's position as president could have an impact on his businesses.
Political contacts can be used to get permissions, sanctions, licenses, permits to build where somebody else may not be allowed to build.
India has the most number of Trump real estate licensing deals of any country outside the US. Other Trump towers are currently being built in Mumbai, Kolkata and New Delhi.
So what is the strength of the Trump brand? Let's go to London and speak to Joe Twyman, Head of Political and Social Research at YouGov. Joe, we were hearing there from India about the relatively positive perception of the Trump name. How does that compare to elsewhere in the world?
Well, it is hugely variable, in fact, the same way that it is hugely variable across the United States. There are areas of countries, and indeed entire countries, where Donald Trump is seen as a favourable person. But of course, there are large areas where he is not, and he divides opinion to a much greater extent than his predecessor, or indeed any previous US president has done. What we know from the global studies that have been done into this area is that, on average, approval for the US leadership has fallen significantly since he came to light. So while there is variation, overall it's the case that support for the United States and support for him as a leader has fallen dramatically.
You've also been looking at how the Trump businesses are being perceived since his election. How has that changed?
Well, it's certainly true that these things are not indistinguishable. People do associate Trump, the brand, Trump the name, Trump the hotel, for instance, with Trump the politician. And so, in those countries where he is not viewed very highly, then the brand is not viewed very highly. For instance, the conversations that he's had where he described countries like El Salvador, countries like the whole of Africa, for instance, although obviously that's a continent. Describing those areas as, quote, a shithole, did nothing but damage his reputation in those areas. And so there, both the brand and the businesses have taken a big hit from South Africa all the way up to Northern Africa.
How much does perception of brands really influence consumer behaviour? We know, as you're saying, in some of those countries, for example, Trump Hotels isn't as popular as it might have been before, but Ivanka Trump's business, for example, still appears to be doing quite well since the election. So is there a direct connection between perception and how consumers behave?
Well, this is a very unusual situation because it's so closely tied with politics. But it's certainly the case that these things one affects the other. Ivanka Trump's brand, for instance, was rejected outright by Nordstrom, a major shoe retailer in the United States just after the election. And we've seen various examples of this in the past. My favourite example is actually Godfather Pizza. This was run by a guy called Herman Cain, who ran as a Republican back in a previous presidential election. And up until he announced his candidacy, Democrats and Republicans had pretty much the similar view of his brand, of him as a person, and crucially of his pizzas. And yet, after he announced that he was running for president, we saw massive growth in support among Republicans, a massive fall in support among Democrats when it came to their attitudes towards the pizza. And so you really can bring about significant change by attaching your brand to a political ideology, position, or candidate.
Could it have gone either way? Is there a question that that in fact the brand could have become much more popular depending on the candidate you're associated with?
It can certainly go both ways. And indeed, to say that Trump's support has fallen overall is true. But that doesn't mean that some areas and some people haven't increased their support for him. In Britain, for instance, people who previously supported the United Kingdom Independence Party, and even those people who wish to leave the European Union, their support for Trump has gone up since he was elected. Now, it started off from a very low base and it hasn't gone up by much, but it has increased. And that is very likely to be played out with his brand commercially as well.
Over the long term, is there more of a chance that the business and the politics could separate in perceptions? Or from what your experience and research is, do they tend to stay fairly closely aligned?
I think the degree to which they are tied together depends on the specifics of the business and the way it's branded. For instance, Herman Cain and Godfather Pizza didn't have that obvious link between them back in the 2010s. However, the link between Trump and Trump Tower, for instance, and Trump golf courses and Trump University is incredibly strong because he has always been such an important part of that branding. It's his name above the door in those hotels. It's his face that was previously, at least, on all these adverts. And so to separate himself from the brand is going to be incredibly difficult. And I would be very surprised if he's able to do that either while he's president or even after he's president.
OK, Joe Twyman from YouGov, thank you very much for speaking to us from London.
Thank you.
Now, here in France, the government is planning to expand the list of sectors in which it can veto foreign takeovers. Under a system introduced 4 years ago, the Finance Ministry must be consulted about mergers and acquisitions of businesses that are linked to national security or public order. Although the veto has been rarely used, it's a controversial measure. Char Pellegrin reports.
Prime Minister Edouard Philippe wants to keep an eye on foreign takeovers of French companies. To do that, he can use the so-called Montebourg Decree instated in 2014 by the economy minister of the same name. It defines the areas in which foreign investors have to consult the government ahead of a buyout. These sectors are energy, water, transport, telecommunications, health, and defense. Edouard Philippe and his economy minister Bruno Le Maire are also looking to expand this provision to even more fields, like the space industry, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and data storage. The French government has used its ability to turn down these buyouts sparingly. This law firm regularly transmits requests from foreign companies to the government. So far, only transactions affecting the defense sector have been blocked.
If there is a fundamental part of an airplane carrier or of a very sophisticated military aircraft that's being made by a company, it's clear that the economy ministry and the army itself will be opposed to a takeover.
When matters of national security aren't part of the equation, the government has no problem giving the go-ahead. In the past few years, quite a few industry leaders have gone into foreign ownership. Cement maker Lafarge, for instance, is now headquartered in Switzerland. This Conservative MP wishes the government was less permissive.
The Montebourg decree is great, but there's a difference between having the right to block a transaction and having the desire to use this right.
This expanded proposal for government oversight will be debated in Parliament in April.
In many parts of the globe, there's been a growing trend of protectionism. So just how does France compare? Kate Moody's been finding out. Kate.
Well, Stephen, France has a long history of protectionist policies dating back to its roots as an agricultural rather than industrial power. Just last year, the new Macron administration showed it was still a hot topic by diving into the future of the STX shipyard in western France. The pro-business president cancelled a deal which would have given Italian competitor Fincantieri a controlling stake. The government nationalized the shipyard, forcing the Italians back to the negotiating table. The two sides eventually agreed to share ownership of STX. Macron said it would keep a crucial industry in French and European hands. France has also been pushing for a tougher screening process on an EU level, and if necessary, the power to block bids. Germany has already tightened restrictions at home, expanding the ability to investigate and intervene in deals. The British government is also seeking more power to crack down on certain acquisitions. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. relies on oversight by the Committee on Foreign Investment. On its recommendation, Donald Trump has already blocked 2 major international takeovers on security grounds. He's supported proposals to reform the body by establishing a list of countries that pose a special risk and increasing scrutiny of minority investment or joint venture deals. Now, much of the protectionist rhetoric in developed countries is focused on China, which has ramped up its pace of foreign acquisitions. Chinese investment in the U.S. dropped from a record $50 billion in 2016 because of opposition in Washington. But Beijing increased its presence in Europe with over $15 billion invested in Germany alone last year. All of this without opening parts of its own economy to reciprocal investment. Stephen?
Kate, thank you very much for that. Well, that's all from us for now. If you have any comments on the stories that we've been covering, you can get in touch with us on Facebook at France24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.